When the Marine told the ER to call someone competent, he had no idea the quiet nurse beside his gurney had once operated in the dark with Delta Force, and what happened next would silence an entire trauma bay in under 10 seconds. The ambulance doors slammed open at 1618 outside Redwood Memorial Hospital in San Diego, and the paramedics rolled in Major Ethan Cole of the United States Marine Corps, with blood soaking through layered field dressings and fury burning through the oxygen mask he kept trying to rip off. He was broad-shouldered, early 40s, the kind of man who looked built for impact, but the gray creeping into his skin told a different story, and even before the monitors began shrieking, Avery Brooks had already calculated the problem from the way his chest rose unevenly and the slight deviation in his trachea that most people would have missed. Gunshot wound, right upper chest, hypotensive, possible tension developing. The lead paramedic rattled off, relief evident as they transferred him to the hospital bed, because the patient had spent the entire ride barking orders at them as if they were junior enlisted and not medical professionals trying to keep him alive. Dr. Raymond Mercer, head of trauma, stepped forward with authority sharpened by habit. But before he could begin his standard briefing, Cole shoved at his hands and snarled through clenched teeth, "Get me someone competent. Not a civilian who's never seen combat." The room tightened, interns freezing mid-motion, nurses exchanging brief glances, the air charged not just with medical urgency, but with insult. Mercer stiffened and used to being dismissed in his own domain, and began calmly explaining credentials and surgical experience. But Cole cut him off again, eyes scanning the room in threat assessment mode rather than patient vulnerability, cataloging exits, personnel posture, hand placement, as if he were still in a hostile zone instead of under. Fluorescent lights. Avery stood at the supply cart, navy scrubs slightly oversized, dark blonde hair secured in a low bun that suggested practicality over style, her expression neutral in a way that took years to master. She had learned long ago that raising her voice wasted oxygen, and that ego in crisis environments killed faster than bullets. So she waited, watching the numbers slide on the monitor. Blood pressure falling from 82 systolic towards 78, oxygen saturation dipping, each beep translating into a countdown she could feel in her bones. "Sir," she said evenly, stepping closer without aggression, "you're building pressure in your chest cavity. If I don't relieve it now, you won't make it to surgery." He turned his head just enough to look at her, eyes flicking over her badge. Avery Brooks, RN. Taking in the absence of rank insignia, the absence of camouflage, the absence of anything that fit his definition of qualified. "Didn't ask for a nurse," he said, voice raw but steady, the authority in it reflexive even as his body betrayed him. She did not argue. She did not bristle. She simply measured the expanding silence as the monitor alarm sharpened and his pulse oximeter read 89. One of the Marines who had escorted him shifted closer, boots heavy against tile, hands flexing unconsciously, the room's geometry changing as loyalty collided with medical protocol. Cole tried to sit up again, pain slicing through him, breath catching, and the effort drove the pressure higher. The wet, strained sound on his inhale confirmed what she already knew. Air trapped where it shouldn't be, lung collapsing under invisible force. "Call someone who's worked a field wound," he rasped at Mercer, "before you zip me into a back." Mercer's jaw tightened, but he hesitated, because the numbers were worsening and the usual algorithm was not stabilizing fast enough. That was the moment Avery moved. No announcement. No flourish. She reached for the decompression kit with the same calm she once used under desert skies without backup, and as she stepped into his line of sight, he caught her wrist, grip still powerful despite blood loss, testing her, challenging her, refusing to yield control. The room held its breath. She met his gaze steadily, gray eyes unflinching. "Let go," she said softly, not pleading, not commanding, simply certain. For half a second he resisted, pride warring with physiology, and then another alarm shrieked as his pressure dropped again, and instinct, older than ego, won. His grip slackened. With her free hand, she pushed back the sleeve of her left arm, not for drama, but because fabric interfered with precision, and in that brief, exposed stretch of skin the small tattoo on her inner forearm became visible, a dagger crossed by lightning bolts, unit number beneath, inked clean and deliberate. The 4 Marines saw it first, Recognition hit them like a physical force, posture snapping straight before conscious thought caught up, because the insignia belonged to a world adjacent to theirs but sharper, quieter, more classified, and the understanding that just a nurse in scrubs had once run surgical support with Delta operators rewrote the hierarchy in an instant. Cole's eyes followed their gaze, locking onto the mark, and something in his expression fractured. Not weakness, but recalibration, as if an internal ledger had just been corrected. She did not comment. She located the second intercostal space by touch, disinfected with efficient economy, and inserted the needle on the exhale without counting down. The hiss of escaping air cut through the noise like a released valve, audible even over the alarms, and his chest expanded differently on the next breath, tension easing, oxygen saturation ticking upward from 89 to 92. Breathe shallow, she instructed, voice steady as bedrock. He obeyed. No argument. No sarcasm. Just compliance born of recognition. Mercer stepped back half a pace, absorbing the shift, while the intern stared at Avery's hands as if trying to memorize motion itself. She secured the catheter, stabilized the dressing, and only then allowed herself a measured inhale, because the first crisis had been handled but the clock had not stopped. Surgery still waited, blood still needed to be replaced, and the larger storm gathering beyond the hospital walls. One tied to a classified operation years earlier that never officially happened, had just brushed the edge of the present. As they prepared to wheel him toward the operating room, one Marine murmured under his breath, not to her, but to the air, "Ma'am," and it carried the weight of rank restored without paperwork. Avery pulled her sleeve back down, covering the ink as if sealing a door, and resumed the posture of a civilian nurse in a busy California hospital, because for now that was the role required. But in the charged silence of Trauma Bay 3, everyone understood that the Marine who had demanded someone competent had found exactly that, and that the story unfolding between them had begun long before this gunshot wound ever did. The operation Major Ethan Cole had been told never happened was the same one Avery Brooks still saw when she closed her eyes at night, and as they wheeled him into surgery, both of them understood that the past had just stepped into the present. The elevator doors sealed them in with the surgical team, fluorescent lights humming overhead, monitors beeping in tight rhythm as sedation slowly worked through Cole's bloodstream. But his mind was still sharp, still calculating. 2019, he said, voice rough but steady beneath the oxygen mask. Northern Syria? Avery adjusted his without hesitation. Yes, sir. The anesthesiologist glanced between them, sensing tension that had nothing to do with the gunshot wound. But Avery kept her tone clinical. Pressure's holding at 88 systolic, she said. We move fast. Cole's eyes locked onto hers. We were told surgical support was extracted before contact, he said. Told no one was on the ground when it went bad. She didn't blink. You were told wrong. The memory hung between them. A joint task force raid that should have lasted 30 minutes and instead stretched into 12 relentless hours after hostile forces arrived with impossible precision, as if someone had handed them coordinates. Cole had commanded the assault element. Avery had been embedded as forward surgical support through a compartmented program tied to Delta Force, unofficial, undocumented, operating in the margins. 3 casualties, Cole murmured as the elevator climbed. 2 of yours. Yes. Her voice remained steady, but she could still hear rotor blades and incoming fire in the back of her mind. I filed the after action, he continued. First draft listed embedded surgical personnel. His breathing tightened slightly. She adjusted the mask. Command sent it back. She nodded once. Clarification of scope. A faint, bitter recognition crossed his face. That's what they called it. The doors opened onto the surgical floor, and the team moved quickly, transferring him beneath blinding lights. As they positioned him, he reached weakly toward her, not grabbing, just stopping her long enough to finish the thought. They said you were gone before contact, he said. Said no support was present. She held his gaze. We were there the entire time. The room shifted subtly, staff pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. Why erase it? He asked, not accusing, just trying to reconcile the gap in his record. Because if we were documented, she replied quietly, then the program was documented. And if the program was documented, so were the assets attached to it. His jaw flexed as the sedative deepened its hold. Families were told training accident, he said, words slowing. I know. She didn't elaborate. There were some truths that didn't belong under surgical lights. I believe the report, he admitted. I needed to. She leaned closer so he could hear her through the fog creeping in. Believing what you're told in the moment isn't the same as lying. His eyes searched hers one last time. I'm correcting it, he said. If I walk out of here. She didn't flinch at the conditional. Focus on walking out, she answered. The anesthesia finally took him, lashes lowering, body surrendering at last to biology rather than will. The surgeons moved in, and Avery stepped back to the perimeter, watching with disciplined stillness. Dr. Mercer worked without ego now, precise and controlled, and when bleeding threatened to complicate the repair, Avery offered quiet adjustments. Angle, pressure, sequence, never drawing attention, simply ensuring survival. Gradually the monitors shifted from critical to guarded, then to stable. 2 hours later, when they rolled Cole toward recovery with color restored and pulse strong, Avery allowed herself a measured breath. Outside the operating room, four Marines waited in rigid silence. When she stepped through the doors, they straightened instinctively. He's stable, she said. Relief moved through them like a silent wave. One of the younger Marines hesitated before asking, Ma'am, you were really there? She met his eyes briefly. Yes. He nodded once, respect recalibrated, understanding that the erased chapter of that 12-hour firefight had just found its missing witness. As they followed the gurney toward recovery, Avery walked beside it, sleeve down, tattoo hidden again beneath hospital blue, knowing survival was only the first battle won. The harder one would be rewriting a record that had buried 3 names under careful language and silence. By the time Major Ethan Cole woke in recovery, the man who had demanded someone competent no longer looked at Avery Brooks like she was just a nurse. He looked at her like a missing piece of a classified puzzle had finally clicked into place. The monitors beside him beeped in steady rhythm, color back in his face, bandages clean and secure, but his eyes were sharp despite the anesthesia haze. You were there the whole time, he said quietly. It wasn't a question anymore. Yes, sir, she replied, checking his pressure without ceremony. He studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the door where his Marines stood guard in the hallway. I filed that report wrong, he said. Not the first draft. The second one. She didn't react outwardly. Command told me to revise it. Said surgical support wasn't present. Said extraction happened before contact. A pause. It didn't. The silence between them carried more weight than any monitor alarm. 3 families, she said evenly. They were told training accident. His jaw tightened. I know. He shifted slightly, wincing but refusing to show it fully. That gets corrected. She met his gaze, measuring resolve the way she once measured blood loss. That'll cost you. Maybe, he answered. But it already cost more not to. For a second, neither of them spoke. Outside the room, boots shifted against tile, Marines instinctively alert, protective, but inside, it was just 2 veterans recalibrating truth. Why stay here? He asked finally, glancing at her scrubs, the hospital badge, the civilian setting 40 miles from base. She gave the smallest hint of a smile. Because someone has to be close when things go wrong. He understood that. They'll come asking questions, he said. About today? About you. Let them, she replied. I'm not active. A beat. But I'm not invisible either. His lips curved faintly at that. Respect, fully formed now. You saved my life. She adjusted his foreline. You were worth saving. Footsteps approached. One of his Marines knocked lightly before stepping in. Sir, he said, voice low. Everything's secure. Cole nodded once, then looked back at Avery. The record gets fixed, he repeated. All of it. She studied him, searching for hesitation and finding none. Then make sure it does, she said. She pulled her sleeve down as she stood, the small Delta Force insignia disappearing beneath hospital blue once more. To the staff downstairs, she would go back to being Avery Brooks, RN, steady, quiet, efficient. To the Marines in the hallway, she was something else entirely. As she stepped out of the room, the 4 of them straightened automatically, not in spectacle, not loudly, just a subtle, disciplined acknowledgement of rank that no longer needed to be spoken. She gave a single nod and walked back toward the elevator, leaving behind a stabilized patient and a promise heavier than the gunshot wound that had brought him in.